He looked me dead in the eye during a board meeting and said, "You're just a secretary. Stay in your lane." That same week, I started recording every shady deal he whispered behind closed doors. Every fake invoice, every illegal transfer. 2 months later, his name was all over the news, escorted out by the FBI, while I watched from my desk. Ever been underestimated so badly that it turned into someone else's downfall? Working as his executive assistant meant I saw everything. I wasn't just managing his schedule and fetching coffee. I had access to every email, every phone call, every invoice, personal and professional. I knew who he spoke to and when. I booked his last-minute flights, confirmed his hotel rooms, and even paid his dry cleaning bills through the company card. People outside the office saw me as just a secretary, but inside those walls, I was the person who made sure everything didn't fall apart. And because I kept everything running smoothly, he stopped seeing me as a real person. To him, I was background noise. But I noticed things that didn't make sense. There were payments going out to companies that didn't exist on any official vendor list. Huge wire transfers were labeled under vague services like consulting or external advisory, but they always came at weird times and were billed in odd amounts. Late at night, he'd use a different phone, a cheap one. He never let anyone else touch it. He'd step out of meetings to take calls on it, and when I once asked about it, just casually, he snapped and said it was none of my business. That's when the questions started piling up in my head. Why was he suddenly having packages delivered to the office under other people's names? Why did he insist on personally signing for them? Why were there so many documents marked confidential that had nothing to do with the actual company? He must have thought I wasn't paying attention, maybe because I always smiled, always nodded, always said, "Of course," whenever he barked orders. But what he didn't realize was that behind the polite yeses and the quiet compliance, I was watching, listening, connecting the dots. I didn't say anything for a long time, not because I was scared, but because I was still weighing it all, still trying to figure out what I was looking at. But the day he humiliated me in front of the board, everything changed. I had suggested a small change to a pitch deck, something I had done many times before. But this time, he rolled his eyes and said, "You're just a secretary. Stay in your lane." Right there, in front of everyone. The room went awkwardly silent. No one stood up for me. No one even looked at me. And in that silence, I felt something shift. I knew then that he saw me as disposable. Someone who didn't matter. Someone who would never fight back. He was wrong. That moment killed any loyalty I had left. All the times I had covered for him, all the questionable things I had let slide, I stopped protecting him. He wanted me invisible. He wanted me to be silent. But I had seen too much, and I was done pretending I hadn't. After that boardroom insult, something inside me switched off, and something else switched on. I wasn't angry in the loud, dramatic way he probably expected. I didn't scream, didn't throw anything, didn't even let it show on my face. But behind the calm, I was already planning. Because if he wanted to treat me like I was invisible, fine. I'd become the quietest threat he never saw coming. I started collecting everything, and I mean everything. Emails that didn't sit right, calendar appointments that looked like business but felt off, screenshots of invoices billed to made-up companies that somehow kept getting paid. I saved them all. I created folders with labels like odd transactions and non-existent vendors. I used personal drives and encrypted backups. I wasn't just collecting junk. I was building a case. But the real evidence came from the things he said when he thought no one was really listening. He had this habit of walking into my office and lowering his voice when he wanted something handled discreetly. "This one's off the books," he'd say, or "just file this under consulting. Don't ask questions." At first, I would just nod and follow orders. But after what he did to me in front of the board, I started pressing record the second I heard his footsteps coming. I had a tiny audio recorder built into a pen I kept on my desk. Another one was tucked in the back of my drawer, just in case. Every whispered conversation, every vague instruction, every mention of side clients and preferred partners went straight into my growing evidence folder. He never questioned it. I was just the secretary, remember? He assumed I didn't have the guts or brains to do anything with what I knew. That arrogance, it made him sloppy. Some of the recordings were shocking. One time, he openly bragged about using interns to move some funds around because they didn't understand what they were signing. Another time, he mentioned a bonus project that involved wiring money to a client who didn't even exist in our system. He used phrases like, "Keep this between us," and "nobody needs to see the trail." But I saw it, and I saved every word. Of course, I made sure I wasn't breaking any laws. I checked the local recording regulations, double-checked what counted as legal evidence, and made sure everything I captured was within my rights. I wasn't going to give him the chance to flip this on me later. I knew how powerful people protect themselves, and I wasn't about to hand him an excuse to make me the villain. He thought I was just helping him juggle appointments and draft emails. He didn't realize I was gathering receipts, dozens of them. He gave me the perfect access, the perfect view of his operation, and he never stopped to consider that someone like me might have a plan of her own. But I did. And every file I saved brought me one step closer to the moment I'd expose the truth. Quietly, carefully, and by the book. It all started to come together once I really sat down and mapped out the paper trail. I had hundreds of screenshots, dozens of hours of audio, and access to every file that passed through his inbox. But it wasn't until I started comparing the payment patterns that I saw the full picture. And when I did, I actually had to sit back for a moment. Because this wasn't just about shady business practices or bad leadership. This was criminal. The company name popped up several times in the invoices. At first glance, it looked legit. Clean branding, a vague website, industry jargon everywhere, but something about it didn't sit right. I checked the vendor database, and Orion wasn't listed anywhere. No contracts, no paperwork, not even a W-9 form. So I dug deeper. I ran a reverse lookup on the domain. The registration was hidden through a privacy shield, but the billing contact linked back to a personal Gmail address. And when I cross-checked the payment records, I noticed all the invoices were approved personally by the CEO, bypassing our standard approval process. Large sums, tens of thousands at a time, were being sent for consulting services that no one could define. No reports, no deliverables, just vague memos that read strategic planning or business analysis. Then I traced the bank transfers. The money wasn't staying with Orion. It was being routed through a series of shell companies, most of which were registered in states with the loosest financial disclosure laws. From there, it ended up in personal accounts with names that sounded made up. These weren't real operations. They were placeholders. And they all led back to one common factor, him. The part that broke me, though, was discovering how he used the interns. They weren't just bringing him coffee or doing data entry. He had them transferring funds, filing fake purchase orders, and inputting invoice numbers into the payment system, all under the guise of training. I saw emails where he'd write things like, "Please process this today. This is an urgent client matter. Just copy the last format we used." They didn't question it. Why would they? He was the CEO. And to them, I'm sure it looked like just another part of the job. But they were unknowingly moving laundered money, helping him wash funds through a fake business. And had I not started digging, they would have been the ones left exposed if it all went south. He knew exactly what he was doing. He used their inexperience as a shield, betting that no one would question a group of interns following instructions. That was the moment I realized how dangerous he really was, not just morally, but legally. He had built a whole operation underneath our noses, using the company's name and resources to fund his own hidden empire. And the worst part, he was willing to drag down anyone, junior staff, contractors, even me, if it meant keeping his secret safe. Once I had everything, screenshots, voice recordings, spreadsheets, invoices, emails, I knew I was holding something far bigger than office gossip or petty revenge. This wasn't about proving a point anymore. It was about protecting the people who didn't even know they were involved. Interns, junior staff, clients, all of them were being used, and most of them had no idea. That realization shifted something in me. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't act. I started by creating a secure email address using a VPN and encrypted browser. I didn't want anything traced back to me. I wasn't doing this for recognition or a pat on the back. I just wanted the truth to land in the right hands. I organized every file carefully, labeled each one so a journalist could follow the story without needing context. There were folders for audio, folders for screenshots, and a spreadsheet that connected every fake invoice to every shady transfer. I even wrote a timeline, month by month, explaining exactly how the fraud had been carried out. There was enough evidence in that folder to bring down an entire leadership team, but I knew who the real architect was. It all pointed back to the CEO, his voice, his approvals, his fake company. I zipped the files, attached a brief note explaining what the folder contained, and sent it to 3 different investigative reporters I knew from years of quietly reading the business pages. No dramatic subject line, just corporate misconduct, verified documentation enclosed. I didn't include my name. I didn't ask for them to reach out. I figured the evidence would speak for itself, and it did. The first story hit in just 4 days. The headline was short but powerful. CEO exposed in corporate fraud scandal. Within hours, it was everywhere. Business blogs picked it up. Twitter was full of threads decoding every part of the scheme. News outlets ran segments on the evening broadcasts. I watched it unfold in real time, sitting in my apartment with a glass of wine in one hand and my laptop in the other. I didn't feel nervous. I felt calm, relieved even. The articles didn't just detail the fraud. They mentioned how interns were used without consent. They outlined the shell companies, the laundered money, the false consulting records. The timeline I created was printed nearly word for word in one of the articles. It felt surreal. I had written it alone in my room, hunched over a keyboard in the middle of the night, and now it was national news. Still, I stayed quiet. No one knew it was me, and that was the point. I didn't need the spotlight. I needed justice. I wanted people to see who he really was without him being able to twist the story. I knew if I had spoken up while still in that office, he would have buried me in legal threats and lies. But anonymous? That gave me power he never expected. He had spent years believing no one could touch him, that he was too smart, too connected, too high up. But all it took was one person paying attention, one voice quietly watching, quietly recording, and the truth, all of it, finally had a way out. It didn't take long for everything to fall apart. The morning after the story broke, the building was a war zone. You could feel it in the air, emails flying, phones ringing nonstop, whispers in the hallways. No one knew what to say out loud, but everyone had read the same headline. And the ones who worked closest to him? They were pale, jittery, waiting for someone higher up to make a move. The board didn't waste time. They called an emergency meeting before noon and locked themselves in for hours. People kept pacing around outside, waiting to see what would happen. No one spoke his name, but you could hear it buzzing in the tension, like we were all standing in the quiet before a thunderstorm. Then, without warning, 2 plainclothes FBI agents walked in through the lobby. It was surreal. I had only seen moments like that on TV. Never expected to watch it unfold down the hall from my desk. They didn't make a scene. No shouting, no handcuffs, no chaos. Just calm authority. They asked for him by name, walked straight into his office, and 15 minutes later, he was being escorted out. He didn't even look angry. He looked dazed. Like he'd just realized the rules of the game had changed, and he was no longer the one holding the power. He glanced around as they walked him through reception, like he was searching for someone to blame or something to hold on to. But no one met his eyes. We all just stood there, pretending to type, pretending to check our phones. while everything he'd built collapsed around him. The impact was immediate. Clients started pulling out the same day. Some sent formal termination letters. Others just stopped responding. A few issued public statements distancing themselves from the company altogether. Investors got spooked. Shares plummeted by double digits within 48 hours. The entire leadership team went into lockdown mode. PR scrambled to contain the narrative, but it was too late. The story had spread too far and too fast. And then his LinkedIn disappeared. Gone. Just like that. No long goodbye post. No explanation. One day it was full of awards, endorsements, industry buzzwords. The next day, it was like he never existed. People speculated he deleted it himself. Others said legal advised him to. Either way, it was a digital vanishing act. And everyone noticed. He tried to spin it, of course. Released a vague statement claiming it was all a setup, a smear campaign. Said someone was out to ruin him. But the documents were too detailed. The voice recordings are too clear. The timeline matched every invoice, every transaction. There was no escaping it. The more he tried to talk, the more guilty he sounded. And eventually, he stopped talking altogether. Behind the scenes, a full federal investigation opened up. Subpoenas went out. Former employees were contacted. Bank accounts were frozen. And the man who used to brag about being untouchable, he was now drowning in legal bills and public disgrace. The same office where he once barked orders like a king now carried his name in hushed tones. Not out of fear, but out of disbelief. Because when you watch someone fall that fast, that hard, you don't forget it. And the ones who underestimated you the most, they're always the loudest when the silence hits. After everything came out, the energy in the office changed completely. People who had never really noticed me before started greeting me with quiet nods, or a soft, good morning, like they were seeing me for the first time. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The truth had already spoken loud enough. The CEO was gone. The story had exploded in the media. And while no one officially pointed fingers, everyone in the building knew who had made it all happen. A week after the fallout, I was called into a meeting with 2 board members and the interim CEO. It was formal but respectful, like they were trying to handle something delicate. They thanked me, not in a vague corporate way, but with real words. "You protected this company," one of them said. "You made a difficult decision and you did it with integrity." That moment stuck with me, because for the first time since I started there, someone at the top actually saw me not as a background assistant, but as someone with judgment, intelligence, and value. They handed me an envelope with a revised salary offer inside. I had to read it twice. It was a raise that finally reflected the weight of the work I had been doing, not just during the investigation, but for years before that. And then came the part I didn't expect. They offered to rewrite my job title. "We understand the word secretary doesn't reflect everything you've been doing. We'd like to change it," the interim CEO said gently. I appreciated the gesture. I really did. But I looked them in the eye and said no. That title had followed me for years. I had been overlooked because of it, underestimated because of it, and talked down to because of it. But I had also carried that title through every late night, every difficult call, every carefully logged piece of evidence that brought down a man who thought he was untouchable. I didn't want to erase that title. I wanted to reclaim it. I was the secretary who took down a corrupt CEO, I told them. And I'm proud of that. They nodded. No arguments, just quiet understanding. And that's when I realized something else had shifted. I didn't just earn a raise or a new role, I earned respect. The kind that doesn't come from a nameplate on your door, but from the actions people remember. After that, my voice carried more weight in meetings. People asked for my input. I was no longer the person who just took notes. I was someone they turned to when they needed clarity, when they wanted the truth, when they were unsure of what came next. I still keep that old badge with secretary printed across the front. Not as a reminder of where I started, but as a reminder of how far people can go when they stop waiting to be invited to the table and decide to hold their own ground. I didn't climb a ladder that wasn't built for me. I built something stronger, and I'll never be invisible again. He thought my silence meant I didn't understand what was going on, that I wasn't smart enough to catch on or brave enough to do anything about it. But what people like him never seem to realize is that silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes, silence is where the real work begins. It's where the observing happens, where the patterns are noticed, where the mistakes get logged, and where the story starts to come together piece by piece without anyone saying a word. I spent years being talked over, brushed off, and kept on the sidelines. And in that time, I watched. I listened. I learned how things worked, who made the decisions, who pulled the strings, who got away with what. I saw how people like him used charm to cover up lies, and how they relied on others staying quiet to keep their power. What he didn't count on was someone paying attention from the background, someone who wasn't loud or confrontational, but still dangerous in her own way. Things like this do happen, more often than people think, to women who are told they're too emotional, too inexperienced, or just not worth listening to. We're given the title of helper, assistant, supporter, and made to feel like we should be grateful for that. But when we stop protecting the people who misuse our time, our work, and our trust, everything shifts. Because we already know their weaknesses. We've seen them up close. And once we stop staying quiet to keep the peace, they lose the one thing they depend on most, our silence. I learned that strength doesn't always look like shouting in a boardroom. Sometimes it looks like patience, like strategy, like waiting until you have the truth locked in your hands before you speak. And by the time you do, it's already too late for them to stop you. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below. Know in the comments below. Know in the